Your end of day market recap. What is today? I believe it is the 23rd. It is Tuesday the 23rd. Another day of the markets where certainly not dull, and have some things to kind of talk about in today's video. Maybe we can actually go over some different stocks for once. Some names that are actually seeing a little bit of rotation into some of the unloved stocks. We'll talk a little bit about that rotation today. The VIX was up about 3.4% today. S&P, hope you survived the market crash today. Of course, I'm being sarcastic here. S&P down 0.5% today. Q's down 0.7 of a percentage point. IWM outperformed, but did not finish up on the day. Down 0.2 of a percentage point. So a little bit of reversal there. At one point, IWM was up close to 1%. Also, the microcaps were outperforming nicely this morning, and they fell apart a little bit. Also, a little bit of a reversal there in gold. Gold was up, I think, around 1% this morning. Still finished positive for the day, but maybe a little bit of profit taking in gold, and maybe even in GDX, gold miners, which I believe I saw some puts trade in that earlier today. Bonds ended up rallying today, up 0.7, maybe a little bit of flight to safety there for the day. So what to kind of get into first in this video is maybe something that I talked about this morning, and I know not only myself, I've been talking about how the VIX has been rising as the market has been rising, and I've seen some data points, and I even put this in a couple AI models, and it told me, hey, there's really not that much of a major concern when the VIX goes up a little bit, when the SPY also goes up. Remember, these things kind of act as opposite. Usually volatility rises when the market goes down, not when the market goes up. But I do remember from my recollection, there was a pretty good warning signal that I thought, and this happened, and maybe some of you weren't trading back then, but certainly many of you were. And this was going back to the beginning of January 2018. So all I'm illustrating here is that now that there was a pretty decent rise in the VIX, and it didn't just happen in one particular day. Here's the chart that I'm referring to. This is, again, going back to this is the beginning of 2018, where the S&P just ran and ran and ran and ran and got pretty darn overbought. And if you look, the VIX at this time, first of all, there's a couple differences that you have to kind of, whenever we're going through one of these examples from years past, there's going to be usually some similarities and some differences, right? History does not repeat exactly. You've probably heard this before, but history does rhyme, right? There's going to be some similarities. I'm never a fan of using like those analog examples. There used to be a fella on Twitter for a long time would always think that he would try to map out like what was happening with 2007 and 2008, and he put that over like back when there was when we were in a bear market in 2022, and he would overlap those two charts and say, "Oh, look at this! This is going to play out exactly like that." I'm very much against that type of thing because history does not repeat. There's all different reasons for different things happening, just like what happened in the beginning of 2018. So that said, there was a pretty big rise in here, and the VIX started to go from like a 10. And you could see the VIX, I think, is over here, right? So the VIX was like at a 10 or 11. We're not at a 10 or 11 in VIX. We're at like, today, I think when we started the day, we were at a 16. So first of all, that's different, what we experienced in 2018. And the VIX started to really rise here on this last move up, and it went up to about a 12. So that's about a 20% gain in the VIX from when this thing. So I remember, and because I was wrong about this back then. Sorry, I'm not even sharing the right chart. I apologize for that. I do this quite a bit with the streaming service. It's a little bit difficult. Let me make sure I've got the right one here. Nope. I think this should be it. Nope, that's not it either. Replace. All right. I apologize for that, guys. So this is from my midday note, and this is what I was talking about earlier with 2018. Right here was the beginning of 2018. This was January, and as I mentioned, the market was really rallying. This is what SPY was doing. It was going up, 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 and up, getting more and more overbought. And here's where the VIX was. It was at a 10, and then it started to rise to about a 12. So that's about a 20% rise in the VIX. So it was making these strides. And then you could kind of see as the VIX was rising for not every day in January, but for the majority of days as you got to the middle of January on. And then you had this big correction where we fell about 10%. So I don't think the exact thing is going on right now. But to me, it is a little bit of those things to say, that shouldn't really happen where the VIX is rising when SPY is rising. Now, you could always quantify and say, oh, it was because of a FOMC meeting, or it was because of that. But if you look at what the VIX has been doing, and I'll bring up the VIX in here, right? Again, it's not the same, right? It's not the same as what you just saw there in the example that I showed you in 2018, but it's off the lows, and it's also above this 200 period moving average. So it could be that it's starting to change a little bit of trends. So I don't really want to question these things and say, well, yeah, maybe not, and when I'm going through this analysis, I try to be as objective as possible, right? I'm not a market bear. I'm more over time a market bull because markets go up over time, right? That's something that everybody knows, right? The markets go up over time, and any correction, any market crash that you've seen over time, the market has been higher from there. But we could definitely go through times where there's corrections, and there could be, bear markets as well. So I don't want to. So I never want to ignore when I see something like this going on, right? So so I would just be cognizant. And again, this doesn't mean that we're going to have something like we had in 2018, where we had about a 10% correction that happened once we got right towards the end of January and into February. I liked what Ryan Dietrich said on, I think he was on CNBC earlier, and he says, "Hey, I wouldn't be surprised if we do get some type of 3-4% correction." That to me would also make sense. Now that we're in one of the weakest seasonal weeks of this year, but I would make sure, again, like what I try to do in some of these videos, what I try to do at Tribeca Trade Group is, number one, like make sure that you're aware of some things and provide some education. For instance, this is what the SPY is doing right now, and we're doing right now is testing the 5-day moving average. So again, we have not broken anything. We have not broken any support. Here's the 1-hour chart, and I said that we could get a check back, and I actually had a trade on for this in NDX today. But this is the support that we have, which is down to basically 661. Notice that we did the same thing last week. This was during the Fed meeting. Right, we've done this week by week by week, as we've come back and we've checked back a little bit, and every time that we've seen that happen, there's been buyers that have come in. So that's a question for tomorrow. I don't know if buyers are going to come in again like they have every week in the last few weeks. Where is my level to watch? That's easy. Again, it's 661. If we start to break this 661, then I know that we've got a little bit more volatility on our hands. Right? Qs. Same thing with the Qs, right? As I mentioned yesterday, we got pretty extended and overbought and probably in need of some type of a check back. So right here, we're checking back to the 5-day moving average. Also notice the RSI, which I said was overbought both on the SPY and the Qs. I'm going to use the Qs here because it's a little bit more dramatic, and it got to a 76 yesterday. Notice we're off those levels. We're back down to, I think, like a 69 here. In the RSI. So no break of any levels here, just to check back to the 5-day moving average, something that we've done all month long. So I would watch for break of the 5-day moving average or a breach. These things will coincide of the value area for the week, which is 595.30. Right? That's basically what I'm watching. Now, here's where I mentioned I'm going to insert a little bit of education, which is what I try to do in these end of day videos. If you are holding, So if, let's say, Ryan Dietrich mentioned that if we do get some type of 3 or 4% correction, how are you safeguarding against that? If you believe, or if you think you want to hedge against something like that. Now, for one, I've got some protection on in SPY. I've got some put spreads on, and I've got some SPY puts that will expire at the end of, what is it, the end of this month, I think. I've got one set that, yeah, I've got SPY puts that are going to expire at the end of this month, and I've got a put spread that expires on the 10th, right? So that kind of covers a 3 or 4% move in SPY. However, and I'm not criticizing any, oops, go back to my I'm not sharing. I am sharing the right chart. Sorry. Um, it's confusing with the streaming. It's very different than how I normally do videos. Now, if you are holding a bunch of high growth stocks, and again, I don't blame you for doing this because they've acted extremely well, but the sensitivity in those high growth stocks are nothing compared to what SPY or Qs are going to do. So you could kind of multiply this out a little bit. So take, for example, try showing another screen here if possible. And we'll go through a couple of these examples, right? And all I'm doing is, I'm not trying to say that this is definitely going to happen. I just want to make sure you're prepared. Take a look at IREN, right, which has been a huge achiever, big outperformer. But let's say that we do get a 3% correction, because I hear this all the time on Twitter. They're like, yeah, I'm riding the trend, right? But the problem is, if the market sells off, and it sells off very quickly, right, these things are going to cause you some damage in your portfolio, right? And having SPY puts or Qs puts will help a little bit, but you have to know where your risk is. So see this number here. This is probably something that if you've been in finance, you probably know a little bit about beta. It's a sensitivity to the overall market. So for example, IREN, it says 2.6%, or you could use adjusted beta and maybe say 2.1. That means that this stock moves about 2.1 times as fast as SPY moves. So that means that if you're putting on some SPY puts, right, well, that will help you a little bit on the downside. But IREN is going to move over 2 times faster, right? What about another darling that's been, really strong? And again, I'm not criticizing. These stocks have been awesome. What about Bloom Energy, if you're holding this one, right? Well, the raw beta in this one's about 1.6, right? So that means it moves 1.6 times as fast as SPY. So these are the things that you could go through, and there's various different applications that you could go, and you should be beta adjusting your portfolio a little bit. Meaning, if you're holding just high growth stocks and that's it, and like 5 or 6 of these things or 10 of these things, right, then you should be understanding, like, if the market sells off 1%, your portfolio is not going to go down 1%, right? Meaning if SPY goes down 1% or 2%, that doesn't mean your portfolio of high growth stocks is going to go down 1 or 2%. They're probably going to go down about 6 or 7%, right? So if that's something that you're comfortable in, if you've made a lot of money on the upside and you're okay with that type of a drawdown, hey, you're fine. But what I'm pointing out here is just because I think many newer investors don't know what beta means and what it means if there is going to be 1 or 2% sell off into the end of the year. What that's going to basically, not the end of the year, sorry, into the end of the month. What that's going to mean for their portfolio. Now, are there adjustments to make, even if you love your stocks, BE and IREN, and a handful of ALAB and TEM, NBIS, right? All these high growth stocks, right? If you want to stay long those names, there's a couple of things that you could do. You can buy puts in some of these things. You could also just trim your exposure a little bit, right? So that instead of, that's also how you decrease your exposure, of course, is just trimming a little bit, right? And that helps too, holding smaller positions with some of these things. But so that's just a concept, and I like to go through some of these concepts. I'm just going to read you something else too. This was a report that came out. I think Goldman Sachs estimated this too. They're saying that pension rebalancing adds to short-term risks, and as quarter end approaches, one-time area of equity portfolio rebalancing carries the prospect of elevated selling this time around, posing a risk to market performance. Flow specialists at Goldman Sachs write that the U.S. pensions are modeled to sell $22 billion of stocks at the end of this month. This ranks with the 89th percentile of such selling tracked over the past 3 years, in the 92nd percentile of flows going back to January 2000. Right? Does that make you think anything differently? And again, why I'm stressing this a little bit here, let me just bring up the right. Why I'm stressing this a little bit is because I did a poll over the weekend and asking people if they thought the market was still going to climb to the end of the year, or if they thought the market was going to take a little bit of a breather to the end of the month. And most people responded, I think it was 53%, thought that the market was going to just continue to climb through the end of the month. Now, I'm one that doesn't think that. I'm the minority. I think that we could possibly get some more volatility. Am I going to go out and predict that? Right? No, I am going to wait and see if we breach some support here. And for now, all that we've done is just burn off a little bit of those overbought levels. Here's also IWM, which also just staying above the 5-day moving average. So there's no cause for panic right now or anything else like that, but these are always things to be thinking about. Remember what Paul Tudor Jones says, right? Who's one of the most famous traders out there. He says, I always look at my portfolio that I've designed and I think about that every position that I'm holding is wrong, right? That's not to scare, someone or to be unconfident about what you're doing. It just means to prepare yourself a little bit and understand what risk you're holding. Right. So that's my little bit of a lesson on that. I'll go into some of the stocks that I thought were of interest today. What I thought held up pretty well today was number one, the quantum stocks, IONQ. And this is another one, by the way, the high. Let's see what the beta is in IONQ. Right. So the beta in IONQ. Still waiting for this to come up. There we go. The beta in this is 2.2, right? So for every percent the S&P moves, IONQ generally, again, when you look at beta, it's like over time. It's not every day. It's on average. This moves 2.2 times as fast, right? So, keep in mind that. But this acted really well today. RGTI both of these names continue to see call buying, which is pretty tremendous at this point. Again, I wouldn't mind if there's some consolidation. And by the way, this whole thing that I mentioned about month end, right, and the pension rebalancing, and if that actually occurs, right, I would actually be a buyer of that, right? That's a one-time phenomenon, like the end of quarter, end of month stuff, right? That doesn't carry on to that. Well, there could be volatility that carries on, but because sometimes volatility starts volatility. But as far as the pension rebalancing, that all finishes up at the end of the month, right? So that's one aspect that, hey, you could get some good buying in something like that. Another group that held up very well today, that's not quite as extended but really got going today, was the aerospace group. ASTS made a huge move today, up 12%. I don't own this one. Kind of wish I did today. I own RocketLabs, which, by the way, like there's, for the market kind of coming in a little bit, these stocks performed exceptionally well, up another 6%. I added this trade into support on Friday. It did really well. You could go with ACHR. I don't know why, but caught a lot of option activity. This is not one of my favorite names in the space, but at least you have like a defined risk type trade if you want to put this on. You could go long versus the 200-day moving average. Let's see if I can figure out how many calls traded today in ACHR. There's 24,000 of this week's 10.5 calls. I don't know why they're trading them so short term. There was also 18,000, so all short term stuff. There was also 18,000 contracts that traded this week for the 10 straight calls. So I don't know, maybe something is brewing in this name for this week. Who knows? Could just be a lot of people kicking around weekly calls. I like this name a little bit better. I don't care that it didn't see option activity today. It just looks structurally more sound. And I actually went a little along a smaller position in this name just to kind of participate. The other adjustment that I'm making right now is I'm just not adding any major risk knowing about all that pension rebalancing and everything else. I've also had a pretty good month. I think a lot of other people have had great months too for the month of September. So I really don't want to do a whole bunch of risk taking and pushing the accelerator down now that we're kind of overbought as we are. A few other things that I thought were notable. Some of the healthcare stocks, McKesson came out with an up their guidance. Right? Again, this is not a real sexy name. Let me just show you one other chart before I go into some of the names that are not as exciting as you may want them to be. This is SPHB, right? So this is high beta over low volatility stocks, and I think I put the wrong symbol in there. SPHB, SPLV. Right? Notice what this has done. High beta has outperformed low volatility very nicely. But usually when I show these charts, and I put this chart on Twitter today, right, it usually means like that's probably the end of the, I don't want to say it's the end of the run, but this is a very mature move between high beta stocks and low volatility stocks. I kind of think the low volatility trade, there might be some reshuffling, pension rebalancing going into end of month, maybe a move into some of the lower volatility names. Hence, McKesson, which had a really nice move today, has been dormant for a while. CAH is another name that had a nice move today. This is Cardinal Health. If you want some newer names, a little bit more exciting, watch this Hinge Health. Now, notice it did stop right at the top of the value area. So it's got to, that's a surefire sign that it's not ready to break resistance yet. Another one, too, that I like is HTFL, which had some news on it. This again, much newer name. This name IPO'd a couple months back, but look at the name, up 14%. And keep in mind, it's not in any indices. So if there is going to be some selling, some index selling, these are going to be less exposed because they're not in the S&P or the Qs as of yet. Not sure what's going on, but the market's rallying right now. Qs are decently up right now. Micron obviously reported earnings. They sold off a little bit. I think a lot of the good news is priced into this stock as well as Western Digital. Hence, nothing wrong with their quarter, but just the fact that they've rallied so much into their numbers. A couple other stocks I was going to mention. MP is a name that I've continued to watch. Watch the 75.52 level. Notice it keeps hitting some resistance up here, so just not ready, but still gliding up above the 5-period moving average. But I would watch that if you're looking for a breakout level. USAR is another name too that's strong as well. This did break through its resistance. 1735 is a level to watch there for a breakout, and it did close above there. Now, one area that I'm going to talk about, which another unpopular area of the market, but I thought was very interesting today, was the energy space, which saw some. Let me just get the right chart up here. A decent amount of call buying. Halliburton. Now, we've seen like bounces in energy before, but we really haven't seen too much option activity in it. These were the November 25 calls that traded for about $1.27. 10,000 contracts, so about $1.3 million bet. Now, being that this name has kind of been downtrending for a while, by the way, it did break its 200-day moving average. It's going to have to battle with overhead supply, which is why these names are not my favorite, because you're going to have to just deal with overhead sellers, right? So notice it got to this VPOC here at 2460 and turned away. If it manages to break through that, the next one up is at 2568. So that's Halliburton. BKR also saw some nice calls today. This one, and again, sometimes with this call activity, you can kind of just take note of it and say, well, I don't want to buy a name that was up. I think when I saw the call activity, the stock was up about 3.5–4%. I don't want to buy Baker Hughes up 3.5–4%. So I kind of just file that away and say, hey, if this name has like an inside day tomorrow where it's like down 1.5% and gives back some of today's gains, then I look for more of an entry in that situation where it's not as extended as it is now, right? And that's the same thing with the Halliburton. A few other names saw some call activity too in the energy space, AR and Terra Resources. So again, these names, they don't have to be names that you own as like a trend trade, as what which is what my bread and butter is. But you can own these for like, hey, a couple days, and then make some profits while other things are correcting, and then you can kind of then look for the dip in those types of things. I was talking about aerospace. Another name that I have been long about for the last week is EchoStar. It's not moving up with the same velocity as the two other names that I mentioned, ASTS and Rocket Labs, but it is grinding higher here. So I will stay long this as long as it stays above the 5-day moving average. Again, it kind of dipped a little bit, but it's still up a lot. And I did take a target in this the other day. So that's my overall market thoughts. I feel like there's something else that I wanted to go through in this video, but I think that that's good enough for today. I hope that helped. We go through a lot more of these concepts more in detail in the Tribeca Trade Group room, and obviously, more things as they're occurring. So you could sign up at tribecatradegroup.com to be a member. At the very least, you could see that on the bottom of your screen, there's sign up for our midday note, which is something that I went over just a few minutes ago regarding that note that I had about the VIX and SPY, and also had every day I have a number of different ideas in there too, some of which I take, some of which I don't, depending on the market circumstances.